You have criticized Hillary Clinton as the, quote, personification of the rot that has sickened the Democratic Party. What is the rot?
Just look at Tulsi Gabbard's face here, because she's been totally expecting that they're going to be smearing her the whole way through. And this was, I think, I'm not sure if this was the first question they asked her in this Democratic debate. They tended to leave Sanders and Gabbard out of most of the questions and the responses to other comments and all of this. But just have a look at her face. It's very interesting. It's like, here we go.
You see in the Democratic Party?
That our Democratic Party, unfortunately, is not the party that is of, by, and for the people. It's a party.
Not a truer word has been spoken. That's actually, even though I'm not a supporter of Tulsi Gabbard, because she has numerous problems, and I've done a couple of videos, 2 or 3 videos on this so far, and I'll talk more about that later, but this is something actually that is quite shocking for somebody in the Democratic Party to actually come out and say. So good on Tulsi Gabbard for doing that.
It is a party that has been and continues to be influenced by the foreign policy establishment in Washington, represented by Hillary Clinton and others' foreign policy, by the military-industrial complex and other greedy corporate interests. I'm running for president to be the Democrat.
So you probably remember when Tulsi Gabbard was on Twitter, was being attacked by Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton called her a Russian asset. And then, of course, she went on The View, and they doubled down on that on The View. And Joy Behar sort of went through, and Tulsi Gabbard responded to that. And, of course, this is the sort of things that happen now. Smears against people that are actually, who claim to be anti-war and anti-imperialist. I'm not saying that Tulsi Gabbard is anti-war or anti-imperialist. She says she is, although her silence is deafening about Bolivia and the recent US-backed extremist coup on Bolivia. She still hasn't said anything. She says she has to get the facts. Well, it's pretty clear what it is. Even Bernie Sanders has said what it is. It's a coup. It's by the military, and now they have a right-wing extremist Christian fascist, Janine Anez, who is openly called Bolivians, indigenous Bolivians satanic, I think, something to that effect. So she actually has a hatred for Bolivians. But anyway, but this is This is a typical thing that's going on here now, smearing people who say they're anti-war and anti-imperialist.
Democratic nominee that rebuilds our Democratic Party, takes it out of their hands and truly puts it in the hands of the people of this country, a party that actually hears the voices of Americans who are struggling all across this country.
And, that would be great. If I thought that was possible, well, that's great. But I actually don't think it is possible for the Democratic Party to redeem itself, because it basically does not listen to most of Americans who want Medicare for all. You still see these Democratic nominees in these debates making all sorts of excuses as to why they cannot do Medicare for all, universal health care, or single payer as they call it. And even though they're quite capable, the sovereign economy is quite capable of doing Medicare for all. In fact, it's cheaper than what they have now. And the Obamacare is just a mess, and thousands of people are dying through lack of health care. Thousands of people are dying because they cannot afford medicines and so forth. And the Democratic Party, that's just one issue that they are hopeless on. And they are intentionally hopeless on it because they have their corporate overlords, the insurance companies and the Big Pharma and so forth. Big Pharma, in fact, has donated huge amounts of money, lobbyist money, to the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party is not redeemable in my view, and it needs to implode, and it may well implode. It may well implode if they once again steal the primary from Bernie Sanders, or if they aren't successful doing that, then call in their superdelegates to override Bernie Sanders and then install whoever they wanted in the first place, which is hard to tell now whether it's Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris. They keep pushing Joe Biden, and he's just absolutely, I think he's slowly losing it cognitively in front of our eyes. But Pete Buttigieg seems to be trying to be the dangerous neocon that he's actually outed himself as a dangerous neocon with his responses to Tulsi Gabbard, and I'll show you that in a little bit.
And puts it in the hands of veterans and fellow Americans who are calling for an end to this ongoing Bush, Clinton, Trump foreign policy doctrine of regime change wars, overthrowing dictators in other countries, needlessly sending my brothers and sisters in uniform into harm's way to fight in wars that actually undermine our national security and have cost us thousands of American lives. It's unfortunate that...
And it's cost hundreds of thousands, millions of Iraqis' lives and other. In fact, the U.S. empire since World War II has been responsible for 20 million to 30 million deaths. So, you know, that's something that sometimes Tulsi Gabbard forgets to mention, that it's not just U.S. soldiers' lives, it's other people's lives. And now, right now in Bolivia, with the US-backed coup in Bolivia, there's already about 40 people have died due to these right-wing coup plotters who've taken over have been just mowing down indigenous people, and it'll probably get worse. And also the coup in Venezuela, which is US-backed, that's also been responsible for much suffering, and the crippling economic sanctions that Donald Trump has put into place are responsible for 40,000 Venezuelans' deaths since 2017. You know, so the amount of deaths from U.S. empire over the decades, particularly since World War II, is appalling.
We have someone on the stage who is attempting to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, who during the Obama administration spent 4 years full-time on Fox News criticizing President Obama. Who has spent full-time criticizing people on this stage as affiliated with the Democratic Party.
So apparently, if you're in the Democratic Party, it's verboten to actually criticize anybody in the Democratic Party, even if they're doing the most appalling things.
Donald Trump was elected, not even sworn in, buddied up to Steve Bannon to get a meeting with Donald Trump in the Trump Tower, fails to call a war criminal by what he is as a war criminal, and then spends full time during the course of this campaign, again, criticizing the Democratic Party. Congresswoman Gabbard, I'll give you a chance to respond. What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies and smears and innuendos because she cannot challenge.
She cannot challenge the content, because actually she did challenge the content, just like when Tulsi Gabbard called her out about her trying to keep a man on death row and other situations like that, where she would put black people in prison and then laugh about it. You know, these are all facts that Tulsi Gabbard is pointing out, and because they're not able to deal with the content, they resort to ad hominem attacks like Hillary Clinton did, calling Tulsi Gabbard a Russian asset. And I'm sure at some point she will call Bernie Sanders a Russian asset. That's what the Democratic Party corporate warmongering tools do when they're challenged about when they don't deal with content, because they really have no real answers for it. And this is what Kamala Harris, obviously, and Pete Buttigieg have been probably nominated to attack Tulsi Gabbard and try and smear her on stage, as they do off stage and in MSN on the mainstream media, and the mainstream media also smear Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, it's a huge tide of smearing that she and others like her who claim to be anti-war and anti-imperialist. I'm saying claim to be, because I don't entirely believe that she is. And I've done 2 or 3 videos about that, so I'm not going to repeat it here. You can check them out. But you know, this is the thing. It's almost verboten to challenge U.S. foreign policy. The Democratic Party, it's almost like a no-go zone. You have to be imperialist. You have to be for war. They love war. They love the weapons industry, and the weapons industry love the Democratic Party and love the GOP. They're like two wings of the same bird. They're warmongering, corporate-serving tools, and I don't even think that the Democratic Party even cares if they win. I think they probably hope, in fact, that Trump might win so that he can actually do all the things that they would like to do, but they don't want the bad press about it. And when it comes to the next election in 2024 or whatever, there's nothing for them to really gain from him not from winning, really, because they can actually do all the they still get all the corporate money, the lobbyist money. They still get all the stuff that they are getting, So what's the motivation? So, Trump can do all the really negative things and take away more civil liberties and do all of that, and they don't have to. It's a kind of a win-win in many ways for them. And of course, if they're going to steal it from Bernie Sanders, and I've criticized Bernie Sanders for his record on his imperialist backings of regime change, even though he seems to have turned a corner in some ways, but he has a long history of backing imperialist regime change wars, and he's still he said that Chavez was a vicious dictator. He's doubled down on that kind of thing, that kind of talk, which is just CIA talking points. But you have to be pro-war, and you have to be an imperialist to get anywhere in the Democratic Party. That's the sad truth, and that's why the Democratic Party needs to implode. It needs to end.
The substance of the argument that I'm making, the leadership and the change that I'm seeking to bring in our foreign policy, which only makes me guess that she will, as president, continue the status quo, continue the Bush-Clinton-Trump foreign policy of regime change wars, which is deeply destructive. This is personal to me because I served in Iraq. I left my seat in the state legislature in Hawaii, volunteered to deploy to Iraq, where I served in a medical unit where every single day I saw the terribly high human cost of war. I take very seriously the...
I'm glad that she said the terribly high cost of war. Now, I don't know if she's including Iraqis in that. Probably not, but she might be. But anyway, she needs to be more explicit about that. And that's another thing that is very disturbing about when candidates like this talk. They often leave out these... They leave out the cost of war, which is actually much more for the countries that they're invading and occupying and overthrowing, the governments they're overthrowing. It's much more than the US soldiers and the veterans that come back and they're homeless and all of that. Much, much more. But they tend to leave out that. And I have my views on why that is, but anyway.
Responsibility that the president has to serve as commander-in-chief, to lead our armed forces, and to make sure always, no, I'm not going to put party interests first. We have Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, and independents coming together saying, hey, we are all concerned about making sure that we have clean water to drink for our families, that we have clean air to breathe, that we're able to raise our kids in a community that's safe. It is the
And that's why, as far as Bernie Sanders' domestic policy, his economic policy, and his economic policy advisor is Dr. Stephanie Kelton, and you can find many videos by her on YouTube. She's a proponent of MMT, modern monetary theory, which is simply a description of the operational reality of a sovereign economy. And I would invite you to check her videos out because it's very important people understand the sovereign economy. Bernie Sanders has been talking about these issues and been consistent about these issues for a long, long time, for many decades. And that's why, in that regard, he's trustworthy.
Partisanship in Washington, unfortunately, that has created this gridlock that has stood in the way of the kinds of progress that I would bring about as president. It's important that we set the record straight and correct the racial injustices that exist in a very institutional way in our country, beginning with things that have to do with our criminal justice system, where predominantly the failed war on drugs that has been continuing to be waged in this country has disproportionately impacted people of color and people in poverty. This is something that I'll do as president and commander-in-chief, is to overhaul our criminal justice system, working in a bipartisan way to do things like end the failed war on drugs. But I want to get back to Pete Buttigieg and his comment about experience.
Now, this is where Pete Buttigieg reveals himself as a dangerous neocon warmonger. And I felt he'd already revealed himself as that with his other responses. I haven't seen the last two Democratic debates because I couldn't stomach it, but the first two that happened, I watched them, and you could see clearly that he's an imperialist. He would fit right in with the Democratic Party. He actually has more billionaire donors than anybody else in the Democratic Party, and I think that they would be more than happy for him to be. I'm sure at some point, I'm sure that he might even be the U.S. president, because he is a complete warmonger, neocon, and corporate-loving, Democratic Party presidential candidate. So at some point, you never know, he may. I don't think that him being from the LGBT community is going to be a problem for him. But this demonstrates the dangerous neocon warmonger that he is.
You'll agree that the service that we both have provided to our country as veterans by itself does not qualify us to serve as commander-in-chief. I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels. As commander...
I've actually seen that video where he says that, and he does say that. And at the present time, it's looking more like there actually will be some sort of a coup against the current president, AMLO. That's his nickname, AMLO. And that's because AMLO is actually, for the first time in decades, they have a president who is not, it would seem, not a neoliberal. Now, he's not a socialist, but he certainly seems to want policies that help the people, and that is, and probably resources for the people. But that's absolutely verboten with the U.S. empire. They want somebody installed that is going to allow the U.S. empire to come in and take their resources, install corporations, have neoliberal policies that make everybody poor, make all the public poor, the poor people poorer, and that's what they're trying to do in Bolivia. The U.S. is helped install a right-wing extremist who has not been elected and has declared herself, she's a Christian, a Christian fascist really, and she's actually hates the population of indigenous people, which is a large number, and she doesn't really, and she intends to make those people poorer and allow the U.S. to do what it wants in Bolivia. And that's what the U.S. does. The U.S. empire, as it is now, does over and over and over again. And Pete Buttigieg would be more than happy to continue on the Clinton, Bush, and policies and Trump policies that have been going on now for a very, very, very long time. And what she actually accused Hillary Clinton, or when Tulsi Gabbard was talking to Kamala Harris, she said the same thing. Kamala Harris would do the same thing. Even though Kamala Harris, you'd swear she was some sort of lefty. During the last year and a half that I've been watching her on Twitter, she's never put a foot wrong, really. But it's all coming out now.
Commander-in-Chief, leader of our armed forces, I bring extensive experience serving for 7 years in Congress, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, meeting with leaders of countries around the world, working with military commanders of different commands, dealing with high-level national security briefings, understanding what's necessary, the preparation that I've gotten to walk in on day one to serve as Commander-in-Chief.
Congressman, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll allow you to respond.
I know that it's par for the course in Washington to take remarks out of context, but that is outlandish even by the standards of today's politics.
Are you saying that you didn't say that?
I was talking about U.S.-Mexico cooperation. We've been doing security.
That's funny. Now have a look at the smirk that comes on Tulsi Gabbard's face, because she knows exactly what that U.S.-Mexico cooperation, that word cooperation, that is absolute nonsense. And cooperation only happens when the U.S. has an installed person, an installed leader, that they've helped overthrow the government, and they've installed somebody, help install a neoliberal who's going to help the U.S. empire rape and pillage the country and make people poorer. So that cooperation word, just have a look at the smirk on her face, because she knows, she's got his number.
Security cooperation with Mexico for years, with law enforcement cooperation and a military relationship that could continue to be developed with training relationships, for example. Do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not...
And that's so disingenuous, because they honestly, these people, these nominees, pretend like the US isn't going around overthrowing governments left and right. And notice there's been no talk about Bolivia, what's happened recently in Bolivia. There's no talk of what's currently happening in Venezuela. And they're just constantly working on overthrowing governments. If you watch the Grey Zone, watch their videos, GRAYZONE, you find out you're kept up to date with the latest meddlings of US empire. So yes, they will be trying to overthrow. When AMLO got into to power in Mexico, I thought it's amazing he even got into power. I'm surprised they didn't try. I'm sure they tried to assassinate him before that time, and I'm sure that they would assassinate him if they could. The CIA backed whomever in there would be trying to assassinate him. But there's no way they're going to let AMLO remain in power. So yes, I think there will be some sort of coup, and coming up soon.
I'm talking about building up alliances, and if your question is about experience, let's also talk about judgment. One of the foreign leaders you mentioned meeting was Bashar al-Assad.
And how interesting. This is another example of selective smearing. It's like the US is arm in arm, well, not so much at the moment, because they obviously don't like Mohammed bin Salman and the way he's obviously not playing ball with the US like he should be, and that's why they've been critiquing him more and more. But Saudi Arabia is a brutal, it's an absolute monarchy, and they literally execute people, behead them in the town square. There's all sorts of massive human rights abuses. In fact, an Indonesian maid a few months ago was executed in the town square. Her employer, and put that loosely, tried to rape her, and she managed to kill him while he was trying to rape her, and they ended up imprisoning her and then executing her in the town square. So that is the sort of ally that the US has, the US empire, and also their other ally, which is an apartheid regime, and that's being kind to it. It's far worse than apartheid was in South Africa. They actually, it's the axis of evil. If there was an axis of evil, it's the US empire, the brutal Saudi monarchy, absolute monarchy, and apartheid Israel. And so this is funny when they call, the reason that they like to, and Assad in Syria, of course, has many problems, but there's a lot of propaganda too that is put out. The chemical attacks, they've been false flags, proven to be. In fact, the chemical weapons people, whistleblowers, have come forward and said that there's been falsified chemical attacks that have been happening in Syria. 2 whistleblowers now have come forward on that. But Assad, yes, he's a problem, but pretty much all leaders in the world are problematic. But they want to overthrow Syria, the Syrian government, Assad, and install their own dictator, and that's why they've been funding literally these quote-unquote moderate rebels in Syria to actually take over the government and overthrow Assad, and they'll keep doing that until it works, and that's why they vilify Assad constantly, as if he's like the most evil person in the world, because they want to overthrow that government. And that's what they do. Anytime they want to overthrow a government of a country, they start to vilify the government, the leaders, and like they're doing with China. It's everything that China does, every single thing. They find that to be a threat economically, and so they've been constantly vilifying China. That's what's been going on now for quite a while. And that's why they vilify Russia, because Russia is keeping up militarily, even though it has only a tenth of the money spent on their military, but they have parity in nuclear weapons. In fact, their nuclear weapons are even superior to the US, and the US doesn't like that. So they constantly vilify Russia. But this is an example. Pete Buttigieg, right out of the CIA talking points, makes out as if Assad is the worst thing in the world. The other thing is that Obama has actually said that he would meet with any leader anywhere. Any leader anywhere. I'll try and see if I can post a quote by him. So it's just the hypocrisy of him saying that Tulsi Gabbard, there's something really, really wrong with her to meet with Assad in Syria, when Obama and lots of other leaders have met with other leaders that they say are undesirable or whatever.
In my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
And that the murderous dictator, and Mohammed bin Salman is a murderous dictator, and they all have lots of communications with the Saud monarchy and have them over for all sorts of things, and so does the mainstream media. They had a big celebration with Mohammed bin Salman in the beginning of the year, and the Huffington, what's her name, that woman from the Huffington Post who used to own the Huffington Post, all kinds of mainstream media people and celebrities came to meet Mohammed bin Salman. That's fine when there's economic interests involved and they've got deals going with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is also fighting proxy wars for them and all of that. But if you dare to meet with someone that the US wants to overthrow, then it's verboten.
Troops to Mexico to fight cartels, and your answer was yes. The fact checkers can check this out. But your point about judgment is absolutely correct. Our commander-in-chief does need to have good judgment. And what you've just pointed out is that you would lack the courage to meet with both adversaries and friends to ensure the peace and national security of our nation. I take the example of those leaders who have come before us, leaders like JFK, who met with Khrushchev, like Roosevelt, who met with Stalin, like Reagan, who met and worked.
There's another example where he's playing out the CIA talking points. Apparently, it's verboten to meet with Kim Jong-un, and they've been constantly vilifying the propaganda about DPRK, North Korea, over the decades is just appalling, because they want to overthrow that government and they want to install their corporations and do all of that and take their resources. There's tremendous amount of resources, just like in Bolivia. Bolivia has a lot of lithium, which the US wants, and Venezuela is I think the fourth largest oil reserves on the globe. Or is it the first now? No, the first, I think, now. I think it's actually really high in oil. I can't remember, sorry. But this is what happens. They vilify DPRK, and then, of course, they want to overthrow. And by hook or by crook, they've been trying to do this for a long time. So, this is another example of picking, selectively picking who's awful and who's not, and just ignoring the others who are not. In fact, the US has supported 73% of the world's dictators. I'm not saying necessarily Kim Jong-un. I don't know what his definition of a dictator is, but it's obviously, when they call them vicious dictators or whatever, it's usually because they're not playing ball with the US empire.
With Gorbachev, these issues of national security are incredibly important. I will meet with and do what is necessary to make sure that no more of our brothers and sisters in uniform are needlessly sent into harm's way fighting regime change wars that undermine our national security. I'll bring real leadership and experience to the White House. My personal commitment to you, to all of my fellow Americans.
Okay, so she goes on and closes out with that. So anyway, that's just an example. I haven't covered everything, of course, but as I said, I find it a bit stomach churning. It makes me very angry because these people lie like rugs, a lot of them. The other people on stage, and and I've said Tulsi Gabbard has problems. She's not said anything about Bolivia. She supported the anti-BDS bill, which makes it very difficult for Palestinians. She's for drone wars. So, there's a different list of things that are problematic with Tulsi Gabbard, but she's calling them out in the Democratic Party, and that's a really great thing, and it's good for people to hear this. Very good for people to hear this. I'd probably check my brakes when I left the convention center if I was Tulsi Gabbard, if somebody was driving them home, because I don't know. I wonder about her security. Because she's saying things to them that Bernie Sanders has said things too, but sometimes maybe not as blunt, and he often prefaces things, like, I'm a good friend of Joe Biden's, but yada, yada, yada. I mean, Joe Biden one of the people that's been trying to destroy Latin America. There's so many things that he's been doing, and of course this whole time with Obama and expanding 2 wars to 7 and all of that kind of thing. I mean, he's a real nightmare, and it appears like he's cognitively losing it. But anyway, these are, it really is sickening watching and I feel sorry for the whole world, and because we're all going to suffer because of this. It's not just the United States and the citizens there that suffer. It's the whole world, my country included, Australia. We all suffer with the various horrific governments, no matter whether they're GOP administrations or Democratic administrations, Democratic Party administrations. All of us suffer because of the sort of foreign policy that they have, and also their meddling. They meddled in my country from 73 to 75 and helped oust, and they admitted it, the CIA helped oust a Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, who had socialist-like policies. He wasn't a socialist, but he had socialist-like policies. He was also against the Vietnam War and all of that kind of thing. All those things are absolutely something that the US empire will not tolerate. And ever since then, it's been a neoliberal mess. It really has. So, like I've said in previous podcasts, I have an axe to grind, and I have an axe to grind about the dreadful suffering that they're causing all over the globe and continue to cause, and countries that will probably never recover, like Iraq and countries in Latin America. I mean, just the devastation, like I said, between 20 million to 30 million people have been killed in association with the exploits, military adventures of the US empire and the regime changes and so forth. Latin America is a great example of the amount of people that were killed by the, just look up the School of Americas. The School of the Americas, it's a regime-changing, brutal sort of operation that trains people to go and, to do death squads and to torture and stuff. They've changed their name. I can't recall the right name at the moment. Western Hemisphere, something or other. I did a video just recently about it. But check that out. The School of the Americas has actually helped overthrow this Evo Morales in Bolivia, and 6 of the generals were trained in the School of the Americas. So check out the Empire Files. That's the empirefiles.tv to find out more about that. And by the way, if you want to see a whole coverage of the post-democratic debate, check out the Empire Files on YouTube. They did a live stream at around my time. It was about 3 o'clock. I think it was about 9 p.m. Sorry, it was about 10:30. Actually, I think they've taken that video down. I think you have to be a Patreon member. I'm a Patreon member, so I can see it after the fact. So I think you actually have to join in on the live stream to see it. But anyway, it was a good coverage. I forgot about that. I'm sure there are other people that have done some coverage about it, but that's probably the one that that I think gives the most comprehensive and clear and morally consistent coverage. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. So thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell. Otherwise, you won't receive notifications when I drop a video. And as always, I enjoy your comments. So thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.